Have you ever noticed that the quietest person in the room often carries the most influence? They don't scramble to speak or fight for attention. Instead, they let silence do the work. And when they finally choose to speak, every word cuts through like steel. That's not coincidence. That's not weakness disguised as calm. That's control. As one saying puts it, silence is the ultimate weapon of authority. We exist in a world addicted to noise, constant talking, endless alerts, non-stop chatter. But true power rarely belongs to the loudest. It belongs to those who understand the piercing strength of silence. This isn't about avoiding speech altogether. It's about speaking with intent and wielding silence as a sharp tool. Let's explore 10 powerful ways silence can transform your presence, your influence, and your inner world. 1. Silence disorients your opponent. When you refuse to respond immediately, you create an unsettling atmosphere for those expecting a reaction. Silence acts as a mirror, showing others their impatience and insecurity. The longer you remain composed, the more uncomfortable they become. People often reveal their motives, weaknesses, or frustration simply because they cannot handle the void you've created. This shift of energy puts you in control without ever raising your voice. In heated moments, silence de-escalates rising tension. Instead of feeding the fire, you absorb it and weaken its intensity. While others get lost in noise, you control the pace with calm restraint. It isn't passive, it's power disguised in stillness. Those who can hold their silence often come out stronger, because every word they withhold gains weight. In silence, authority thrives, and the loudest aggressor ends up exposing their own flaws. 2. Silence clears away distractions. Every day, we are surrounded by endless notifications, unsolicited opinions, and constant background noise. This flood of distraction fragments our attention and scatters our thoughts. Silence, however, creates space for clarity. When the noise fades, your mind sharpens, your priorities realign, and your focus deepens. Quiet time is not just rest, it's recalibration for the brain. Stoic philosophers warned against speaking before reflection. They valued silence as a filter that separates impulse from wisdom. When you step away from noise, you allow space for perspective to form. You can see what truly matters and what deserves to be ignored. In silence, creativity flows more naturally, and decision-making becomes sharper. Instead of drowning in the voices of others, you hear your own voice more clearly. That's where true direction and insight are born. 3. Silence draws people toward you. There's an undeniable magnetism in silence. The less you speak, the more curiosity you generate. When you withhold your thoughts, you create a vacuum that others instinctively want to fill. People lean closer, waiting, wondering, and anticipating your words. This psychological pull makes your eventual voice far more impactful. A quiet person often appears more composed, confident, and mysterious. They don't waste words, they choose them. This selective communication makes listeners value what is said, because they know it won't be careless. In fact, anticipation amplifies significance. When silence precedes speech, the message lands with 10 times the weight. By cultivating silence, you don't just hold people's attention, you command it. The world craves noise, but it respects those who can stay still until the moment truly demands sound. 4. Silence builds inner toughness. Silence isn't emptiness, it's training. When you choose to sit alone with your thoughts, without reaching for constant distractions, you're strengthening your mental endurance. It's not always comfortable. Silence confronts you with your doubts, your fears, and your inner noise. But facing that discomfort builds resilience. You learn to withstand pressure, boredom, and even your own insecurities. Think of silence as a mental gym. Just as physical muscles are built through resistance, your mind gains strength by sitting in stillness. Over time, you become less reactive, less dependent on external stimulation, and more anchored in yourself. When storms of chaos hit, those who have trained in silence don't shatter, they remain steady. The inner foundation they've built in quiet moments becomes unshakable. That's why silence isn't weakness, it's a warrior's discipline. 5. Silence crushes ego. Ego thrives on noise. It demands attention, recognition, and validation. Loudness often comes from an insecure need to be noticed. Silence, on the other hand, reflects self-assurance. When you can resist the urge to constantly prove yourself, you display true confidence. You already know your worth, you don't need to announce it. Choosing silence humbles the ego. It reminds you that wisdom doesn't need applause and that truth doesn't beg to be heard. By speaking less, you step away from arrogance and into authenticity. Silence keeps pride in check because it teaches restraint. The less you say, the more you observe. The more you observe, the more you understand. Ego fades when you realize that strength isn't in proving superiority, it's in being secure enough to not always respond. Silence becomes your shield against vanity. 6. Silence strengthens your negotiating power. In the art of negotiation, silence is one of the sharpest tools you can wield. When you make an offer and then stop talking, the silence becomes unbearable for the other side. Most people rush to fill the gap with concessions, clarifications, or unnecessary justifications. In doing so, they reveal information that shifts the advantage in your favor. By refusing to speak, you create pressure. The person across from you feels compelled to break the silence, often giving away more than they intended. This is where your power lies, not in what you say, but in what you don't. Negotiation isn't just about words, it's about timing and control. Silence forces others to show their cards while you hold yours close. With patience and discipline, silence turns the tide and gives you the upper hand. 7. Silence demonstrates respect. True listening cannot exist without silence. When you stop talking and genuinely allow someone else to speak, you give them a rare gift, the feeling of being heard. This act conveys respect, empathy, and value. People open up more deeply when they sense you're not waiting to interrupt but are fully present with them. Silence in conversation isn't weakness, it's acknowledgement. It tells the other person, your words matter. And in return, it strengthens trust. In an age where most people compete to be the loudest, those who choose to listen stand apart. Their silence builds bridges where noise creates barriers. Respect is not shown through dominance but through restraint, and silence is the simplest form of that respect. 8. Silence enhances deep listening. Listening deeply is more than staying quiet, it's about silencing your inner dialogue as well. Too often, while others speak, we prepare our response instead of absorbing their message. True silence means setting aside your assumptions, judgments, and rehearsed replies so you can hear fully. This depth of listening captures not only words but emotions, pauses, and unspoken signals. Silence gives you access to layers of meaning that chatter overlooks. When people feel deeply understood, they connect to you on a profound level. It transforms ordinary conversations into meaningful exchanges. Practicing silence in this way doesn't just improve relationships, it reshapes them. You stop hearing merely what's said, and you start understanding what's meant. That is the power of deep, silent listening. 9. Silence cultivates wisdom. Wisdom doesn't grow in constant noise, it requires silence. Only in quiet can you reflect, analyze, and question deeply. By withdrawing from distractions, you allow your mind to process experiences fully. Reflection uncovers truths that fast-moving conversation often buries. Speaking less naturally forces you to think more. The fewer words you use, the more value you give to each one. Silence turns into a teacher that nurtures patience, perspective, and insight. Ancient thinkers believed wisdom is less about gaining knowledge and more about filtering what is unnecessary. Silence creates that filter. When you hold back speech, you make room for thought. Over time, reflection transforms into understanding, and understanding into wisdom. This is why silence has always been the companion of great thinkers. 10. Silence becomes strength in hardship. During crises, the world often drowns in noise, panic, complaints, and blame. Silence, however, offers a refuge. When you remain still, you separate yourself from the chaos. Silence allows you to breathe, to think, and to face hardship with composure instead of despair. Those who practice silence don't crack under pressure. They endure storms by staying centered. Silence acts as armor. It prevents rash reactions and replaces fear with calm determination. In times of hardship, those who remain quiet are often the ones who rise as leaders, because they radiate stability when others unravel. Silence doesn't just help you survive challenges, it empowers you to master them. In the darkest moments, silence transforms into strength that cannot be broken. Final note: choose silence as power. Silence is not emptiness. It's not weakness. It's precision, clarity, and strength in its purest form. To adopt silence is to gain self-control. And when you master yourself, no one else can command you. Noise is cheap. Words are endless. But silence is priceless. It holds the gravity of wisdom, the force of discipline, and the magnetism of mystery. Here's your challenge: practice silence. Let it become your shield, your advantage, and your strength. Remember, this silence isn't empty, it's overflowing with answers.